Palmgren. Thank you for tuning in to Red Ice Radio, redicecreations.com. It is lovely to have you with us wherever you are. We have a little bit of a late Yule present for you today, as we are going to do an extended segment, our second program, as promised, in our mini-series with John Lash from metahistory.org, author of Not in His Image. He is with us to expand on the latest program that we did on white genocide and the Archontic infection. And this time, it's to announce the Kalika War Party. Mr. Lash, good to have you with us once again. I know that a lot of our listeners have been in the mood for our second program, and it's been a while, but you've had some things in the works and things have lined up now, so this is a good time as any to do it. So welcome back, John.
Well, thanks. It's good to be with you again.
Absolutely. We have, of course, a lot of good stuff we talked about last time, and we're going to, kind of take that next step in that process and discuss a little bit more about what to do about some of the things we did address and how to begin to interact with this in a different way. And you have come to an idea here. You wanted to build something up that you call the Kalika War Party as a means to get into this. Tell us about how you got this idea and what this means.
Well, I think first of all, it would be good if I said what it means to me personally. I can't say what it may come to mean to anyone who listens to this interview, or whether it may come to mean something of an enduring impact in anyone's life. But I can't say I'm taking a very big gamble with something. But I can say at the outset, because I do like to be totally transparent, that the Kalika War Party is really the culmination of my entire life. And so this is a big moment for me to be talking with you, recording this, and to be using Red Ice and having the opportunity to use Red Ice to announce the Kalika War Party. It seems like I was reflecting on it this evening, downstairs with the cats in front of the fire. It's a nice, cool, clear winter night here in Spain. The sky is like obsidian stone,
lovely,
with diamonds encrusted in it. And I was sitting before the fireplace in the salon. I was thinking about you, really, actually, and Red Ice, and when we first got together, and it's like 5 or 6 years now we've been talking to each other.
Many years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, I think we started out, well, certainly we did, with an emphasis on Gnosticism because of my profile as a Gnostic scholar. Okay, self-educated Gnostic scholar. And then, of course, we went right into the Archon material, and I think we did a couple or 3 talks on that.
Yeah.
Relating it to transhumanism, things like that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, you've been extremely helpful to me with the Red Ice broadcasts, which have been decisive in getting out the Archon intel. And I think it's largely due to you that people now recognize that I'm the person that introduced that term into the discourse. So we've come a long ways, and what we're going to talk about tonight is of absolute paramount importance to me. And I'm grateful that you're at the other end of the line. You are, as far as I know right now in my life, the most appropriate person to be having this conversation with.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And as you know, we've been very glad to be able to facilitate that. And of course, going through a lot of this work with you. So we're always very pleased that you want to come back and return to us and do these types of shows, because I think it's really important. And it takes things to that kind of next level, a deeper level to understand the both the complexity, but the problems in the world as well. So I think it's really appropriate,
Well, sure. And we're not just talking and making words and making sounds about one subject or another, but we're building continuity here. You and I have built some continuity, and for one thing, as we already discovered in our last interview in August, uh, one result of that continuity is that it has brought us simultaneously to the same point. Simultaneously, although on the different paths of our lives, your life in working in one way, mine developing in another way, brought us simultaneously to the issue of the white genocide agenda.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
see? Yeah. So what I'm going to say tonight ties in very closely with that agenda. And it's the place to start, I would say, is where we left off with that talk in August. I believe that I said at the end of the talk that I would like to start the next talk on the subject of Parsifal. Was that true? I think that was the case.
As a warrior, as a knight. Yeah.
Yes, as a warrior and as something else as well. So I'd like to start out. I'd like to lead in to answering your question, namely, how did I come to create this entity called the Kalika War Party? And I'd like to do that by way of talking about Parsifal and the legend of Parsifal. So here goes. You know, Joseph Campbell was a comparative mythologist. I think he died in 1986. You certainly know who he is, and I think he's fairly well known in among the planetary intelligentsia, wouldn't you
Yeah, I
say,
think
Henrik?
so. Definitely. He's one of the bigger names. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've been compared to him. I never compare myself to him, by the way, but I don't make that claim. But other people have made that comparison simply because we both deal with the same material. That is to say, we are comparative mythologists. And they are relatively rare on the planet. Mircea Eliade was also a comparative mythologist. And a comparative mythologist is different from the ordinary mythologist who graduates from some university, whether it be of Stockholm University or the Sorbonne or Harvard or Stanford. I guess they're still graduating mythologists once in a while. But most mythologists are really specialized. They will only discuss one subject area, whether it be Greek mythology, Celtic, Chinese, or whatever. It is, after all, a hugely diverse field of material. But a comparative mythologist, such as myself, uh, ranges over all of the different cultures and looks at all the different mythological themes and complexes and narratives and compares them. So Joseph Campbell, who was arguably the greatest comparative mythologist in the world at the end of his life in 1986, made a signal statement in a book called Creative Mythology. One of Campbell's books, he wrote many books, he was quite prolific, but one of his series of books is called The Masks of God, and it consists of 4 parts. And the 4th part is called Creative Mythology. The others are, I think, Primitive Mythology, Oriental Mythology. I can't remember the 3rd one. So in Creative Mythology,
Oh, I think it's Occidental mythology.
Occidental
Western.
mythology,
Yeah.
of course.
We can't forget that one.
Can't forget that one.
Yeah.
But you know that series then. It's a blockbuster, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. So anyway, in Creative Mythology, he deals extensively with 2 great medieval narratives. Tristan by Gottfried von Strasbourg and Parsifal, which exists in numerous versions. Now, he makes a statement in that book to this effect. This is almost an exact quote. Parsifal is the paramount secular myth of the Western world. Now, what that means is that it is the paramount and supreme guiding story of the Western world and of all Western cultures, whether they be Germanic, French, Hispanic, whatever. It contains the master narrative, the story of Parzival, according to Joseph Campbell. And I totally agree. And I hope I intend by the end of this conversation to make it clear exactly why that is so. And I'd also like to show by introducing the Kalika War Party that myth is a myth to be lived. It's not merely a myth to sit back and read for entertainment or some edification that you might get, some insight about yourself you might learn from reading the myth. That can certainly happen. But the way that I teach mythology is by participation. So I speak of directive myths, myths that can direct your life and even direct the lives of whole nations and cultures. Now, sometimes a myth can direct people very badly because there are, toxic myths.
Yeah.
There are pathological myths. If you just take the simple view that a myth is a narrative produced by human imagination, I think that's a good basic definition. Well, it leaves open whether that narrative makes sense and is an enlightening and moral story or whether it is destructive. I'll give you an example of a toxic pathological myth, the myth of the chosen people,
Yeah.
the myth of the Messiah, the myth of the apocalypse. Now, there's certainly no doubt that those myths have a huge impact in human history, globally, wouldn't you say?
Way too much. Yeah.
Yeah, way too much. And yet we can recognize at the same time that the power of myth cannot be avoided. So we can't just say those are terrible myths, those are lies, those are pathological lies that have been somehow hatched out of human imagination, and let's get rid of them and move on from here. Sorry, folks, it just can't be done that way.
Yeah.
There has to be a countermanding narrative that's strong enough to supplant and overcome and defeat the pathological myth. And this is what I see in the myth of Parzival. This is what Joseph Campbell also saw. Now, you mentioned that Parzival was a warrior, and that's true. He was a knight of the round table. But at the same time, he was a mystic because the main theme of Parzival's story is the quest for the Holy Grail. Isn't that
Yeah.
true? And so what you find in the myth of Parzival is a combination of two extremely powerful elements. One of them is the quest for the Holy Grail, whatever that is, a mystic quest, which might be considered the supreme mystical quest. I certainly consider it to be the supreme mystical quest on this planet, is the quest for the Holy Grail. But combine that with a warrior path. So it's a warrior and a mystic you see in the character of Parzival. Now, how did I come to the Kalika War Party? Well, I came by living the story of Parzival, by living that myth and letting it direct my life, which is what you can do with myths that you choose if you choose them wisely. If you have the discernment to choose myths that are creative and positive and moral. And there are many, and many of them are the creations of the white races, I might add.
Mm.
Many of the most inspiring directive myths on this planet are the creations of the white Aryan races. That's just a fact. So, I guess I started talking about the Kalika War Party, 2 or 3 years ago. when I was doing some interviews on a certain platform that no longer exists. And at the time, I didn't really have the formation of it and the structure of it. That is to be revealed this evening. It's just as if, in the course of my life, because I loved and lived this myth so deeply, of Parzival, that a germ was formed in me, you know? The germ of the Kalika War Party was born in me in this course of living this myth. And so I've, in many ways, pursued the same things that Parzival pursued, the quest for the Holy Grail in particular. And without going into a digression, I'd just like to say, if I might, and I'm happy and proud to be able to tell people on Red Ice Radio, in case anyone is curious, what the Holy Grail actually is.
Mm-hmm.
I heard someone talking the other day, I don't want to go into a regression, but I'll say this in less than a minute, who claimed that the Holy Grail, the quest for the Holy Grail, is just a path or practice leading to self-knowledge. It's a way to know yourself. Have you ever heard a line like that?
Plenty of times. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's absolute and total crap. And anyone who says anything like that reveals that they don't have the faintest idea what the Holy Grail is. The Holy Grail is one thing and one thing only. This can only be said by someone who has attained the Grail. It is the organic light. And to attain the Grail is to encounter that light. Now, what is the organic light? Well, it is the light that was witnessed in the ancient mysteries, of which no one ever spoke. There was a vow of silence, not secrecy, a vow of silence applied to protect the sanctity of this light. It is the light of the earth itself. It is the light of the naked body of the goddess Sophia, who is in material immanence in the earth. It's sort of like the body of a woman. When you see her with clothes on, that's when you see the planet you're looking at right now. You see the trees, the rivers, the mountains, the clouds, the plants. That is the clothing of the Aeon Sophia, of her body. When you see her naked, you see the organic light. It is a singular and unmistakable experience, and it is the same for everyone. So the organic light that is in the story of Parzival is a story about a young man who found his way to the encounter with the organic light. He was a warrior of the Arthurian Knights, and the whole story is a fantastically beautiful adventure, a romance with a very complex plot, an amazing plot. But there's a remarkable factor in the Grail story that I would like to focus on, because it is the secret to the Kalika War Party, you could say. Or you could also say maybe, well, it's the qualification for entry.
Right.
There is something called the Grail question. Scholars discuss this thing called the Grail question when they analyze the works of Wolfram von Eschenbach, who wrote Parzival, the best version, the pagan version. Have you ever heard this term, the Grail question?
No, actually, I haven't.
Well, it's extremely important, not only because it's a key to the whole Parzival adventure and how it turns out, but even more so, really, Henrik, because it's a key to humanity, to the humanity of every single person. You could say that unless you can ask the Grail question, you haven't really realized what it is to be human.
Yeah.
And so Parzival asks the Grail question in this story. And his failure to ask the question the first time determines a lot of the events that happen in the story. Then he comes around to a second opportunity. He's at the Castle of the Grail, and all of the family of the Grail, they're called the Company of the Grail. These are the people who live in the company of the organic light. They are, in fact, the diaspora of the great initiates of the pagan mysteries. And among these people is the one called Anfortas, the wounded Grail king. And the trick to the plot of Parsifal is that in order to prove that he is worthy to hold the attainment of the Grail, he must ask the Grail king a question. But no one can tell him what that question is. No one can prompt him or coach him. It must come out of his innermost soul. And so what is the Grail question? It's the question that every single human being must ask in order to fully become a human being. In the text of Wolfram von Eschenbach, the Grail question is translated in just 3 simple words. What ails thee? Parsifal is kneeling, the young knight, he's very young, is kneeling before the old knight, the wounded fisher king. And he's suffering from a deep wound that he received in a battle. He was pierced by a lance. And this wound will not heal. Yet he cannot die from this wound. Neither can he be cured. This is the plight of patriarchy. This is the plight of the wounded Grail king. And part of Parsifal's mystical mission is to ask the king this question. And it's usually translated as, what ails thee? So he's asking the old wounded knight, well, what hurts you? I've thought a lot about the Grail question, and I could say something really wonderful happened when I realized that I could put words to the Grail question that had never been put before. What I mean is that I could put it in a language, in a phrase, and when I put the Grail question in that phrase, suddenly the Kalika War Party was born.
Mm.
Are you following me
Sure.
here?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Good. So I thought, well, wait a minute. Parsifal was a young knight. He'd fought many battles with lance, with sword, hand to hand. Amphortus, it's from the Old Greek amphematas, meaning wounded or ailing. Amphortus was a very old knight, sustaining a terrible wound, yet he could not die. He was in terrific agony. Now, what would the young knight, these are 2 men of the warrior class. They know what it is to fight. They know what it is to be wounded. What would the young knight kneeling before the old knight actually ask him when he saw the wound? Well, I thought, after many, many years of reflection, that what he would actually ask would be, well, who did that to you?
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that what one knight would ask another knight?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get the wound? Who did that to you? You see?
Yeah.
That is the Grail question. And so, today, the day I announced the Kalika War Party, I ask everyone who's listening to line up with me, shoulder to shoulder with you. We're all standing in a line, shoulder to shoulder as equals. And we're looking at humanity. We're looking at the wounded species of humanity. And we all ask it the same question. Well, humanity, who did that to you? That question is a question about suffering, because the fact is, on this planet, a lot of people are suffering right now as I'm speaking these words. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
But you and I, fortunately, are not suffering right now, are we?
Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at. Not physically, but we suffer in
Right,
different ways, right?
right.
Um,
But we don't have bombs railing down on
sure.
our heads, do
No,
we?
no, of course not. No.
We're not in the situation that many, many people in this world are in, where they can't feed themselves, where they're starving, where they don't have water to drink,
Yeah.
where they're being subjected to one form or attack of another, you know? So it's probably the case with people who are listening to this interview. Ask yourselves right now, those of you who are hearing my words, are you suffering? Well, you may be suffering from some personal matter, like the death of a family member or something like that. But you're not suffering in the way that the wounded Grail King was suffering. Yet many, many people on this planet are suffering in that way. And if you want to be human, if you want to step up to the plate and be a warrior on this planet, then you have to ask, well, who is doing that? Who is causing this suffering? Now, and what can you do about it?
Right.
If you want to do something about it, you know, if you want to, you could live your whole life, some of the people listening now, and I myself, and you as well, Henrik, we could live our whole lives and never come under a really direct lethal attack from the enemies of life.
Yeah.
It's
That's
possible.
absolutely. Um I think it's too much of that. I think it's too much of that kind of isolation of being just stuck in the creature comforts and never really experiencing that part of life, you know?
Well, it's a question of empathy, wouldn't you say?
Sure.
It's like, I have my creature comforts. I'm not under direct attack. I'm not hiding in a hole in the ground and fleeing white phosphorus and chemical weapons
Yeah.
and jet fighters. But some people are right now, right as I speak.
Yeah.
Okay. And what am I to do? Is sit here and think, well, because it doesn't touch me and I'm not there with them, then I can't do anything about it and I'm not going to think about it. Anyone who does that definitely excludes themselves from the Kalika War Party.
Right.
Because one of the qualifications of this party is that you have to care about the suffering of humanity, even if it doesn't reach you in a gruesome manner.
Yeah.
Okay? So, the Grail question is, who did that to you? And when I got the question in that way, something fell into place in my mind that I swear had not fallen into place in my whole life. I've thought a lot about suffering and the nature of suffering. Uh, I first began to consider or examine or investigate the nature of suffering through Buddhism when I was about 19, 18, 19. And I was wandering around India and out there in the Far East. And I came across the teachings of Buddhism and I came across what is called the Four Noble Truths. This is one of the basic teachings of the historical Buddha. You probably have heard of it. Many people have. According to the Four Noble Truths, all existence is suffering. Sarvam dukkam.
Mm.
Dukkam, dukkha means suffering in Sanskrit. Sarvam dukkam, that's the first noble truth. Everything is suffering. This is what Buddhism teaches. So I started out, chewing on that morsel when I was quite young. And I was not really satisfied with what Buddhism has to say about suffering. And I can tell you right now, with no hesitation whatsoever, that Buddhism is an absolute and total failure when it comes to the question of suffering. It has no answer. Its approach is ignorant and impotent. And I'll tell you why. Because Buddhism does not distinguish suffering of the two kinds. It does not, when the Buddhists say savam dukkam, all is suffering, they don't distinguish that there are two kinds of suffering that human beings can endure. One is just what happens in the natural course of life. You may lose a person precious to you, an animal may die, you suffer, you may have an accident and break your leg. We can suffer in life from a variety of things that befall us just in the course of life.
Yeah.
But there's another kind of suffering, isn't there?
Yeah. And
Oh, yeah.
an imposed one, right?
A deliberately imposed suffering. So, for instance, the example that I have used before is if you have a beautiful young daughter, let's say if I have a beautiful young daughter and I don't have any children, but suppose I had a beautiful young 12-year-old daughter and she drowned in a swimming accident, I would really suffer badly.
Yeah.
Those things happen in life. But take this scenario. If my 12-year-old daughter was abducted by a murderous pedophile, molested, and then killed, well, I would suffer from that too. But it wouldn't be the same kind of suffering.
Yeah.
And the Kalika War Party is about the second kind of suffering and what to do about it.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about the first kind, can you?
That's nature. It's part of our life and existence.
It's part of existence, and in some ways, it can enrich you. It can
Absolutely.
deepen your
Yeah,
humanity.
definitely. I think so. I think that's a key to a lot of things, you know?
And so, in facing the question of suffering, which is where it all starts with the Kalika War Party, stand before the question of suffering and be a real human being. Face it. Don't turn away. In standing in front of that question, we can say, okay, I accept that kind of suffering that comes in the course of life, and I wish that it would deepen my humanity, give me compassion, teach me things, make me more humble, make me more stronger, and whatever doesn't kill me does make me more stronger.
Mm.
That's a good creed to live by.
Yeah.
Then we turn our glance to the other kind of suffering. The mass amount of suffering on this world today, on this planet, is suffering that is deliberately inflicted by some human animals on other human animals. And the question that burns in my mind now is, what am I going to do about that kind of suffering? So that's kind of the process of thought I went through. Just taking you through it, sort of like I went through it,
Yeah.
you see?
Yeah. Great.
Those are the considerations that I made. And finally, I was making these considerations like all my life, really. But I didn't know I was. I was making them sort of subconsciously. Then they began to become more and more conscious. Then they began to be urgently, blazingly conscious.
Mm.
And then it broke through for me. And the minute it broke through was in March of this year when I completed the Gaian navigation experiment. And in the last briefing of that 3-year event, I said, I finally come to realize what the world needs. That is a solution to all the problems on this planet. It needs a warrior class.
Yeah.
A warrior class who will stand in defense of humanity, in defense of life, in defense of the planet, of all sentient beings, and who will counterattack those who deliberately harm others.
Yeah.
Now, why do I say this is the sole solution? I say that because it is a solution that covers all other solutions. No matter what else you may be doing, and I'm sure many people listening to these words are doing their absolute human best to deal with what's wrong on this planet. And I send love and courage to everyone who takes on that mission to make a better world, to clean up society, and to fight in one way or another for life and beauty and freedom. I'm right there alongside you. But I must add a particular insight that no matter how good you are at changing the world for the better, if those who don't want the world to change can't be eliminated, then you're not going to make it. And in my mind, elimination is the operative term.
Yeah.
I mean, we would all love to change the world, wouldn't we, Henrik? To go out and dance in the streets tomorrow and change it. Sometimes it seems like it's right at your fingertips. It would be so easy because we know that human nature is innocent and kind, basically because that's the way we are. And if we could just change the world by a stroke of magic, we would do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
But there are people who don't want the world to be changed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And those are the same people, the psychopaths, the intra-species predators, and the enemies of life, I call them. Those are the same people who will not allow change to happen, change for the better. And those people have to be eliminated in any possible way, including magic. Now, just to get things aimed in the right direction here, let me point out something. The Kalika War Party is a blueprint for a warrior class. What is a warrior class? It means a gathering of people from any nation, any culture, any ethnic group, any place on the planet. A gathering of those people to unite in one single goal, and that is to eliminate psychopaths and the enemies of life from this planet, to terminate them. So it is a radical attack program.
Yeah.
And part of the strategy of the party is to use magic. Now, it's often been said that they use magic against us, right?
Sure. Yeah.
How many people claim that? How many hundreds of times have you heard people claim that? Oh, they're using magic. The Illuminati are using satanic magic on us, right? Satanic magic / mind control / psychotronic weapons, you name it, right? I mean, how many people have you interviewed who've said this?
A lot of them, occult methods and subversive, esoteric practices, etc. Yeah, for sure.
That's right. Well, two can play at that game, pal. And if they can attack us with occult and esoteric methods, I certainly know how to attack them in return. And this is what the Kalika War Party is dedicated to doing. Now, on that note, I just want to make one thing really, really clear. This is a really important point in this conversation. The warriors of the Kalika War Party that I'm proposing, that I'm inviting, are also shamans. So there is a blend of the shaman and the warrior together in the members of the war party. Shamanism has a lot to do with the way the party operates, okay? And one thing that has caused me a considerable amount of distress over many years now is that the revival of shamanism that we see in many, many instances, ayahuasca shamanism or whatever, shamanism is a big trend, right? It's a big
Oh,
fad,
yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
huge,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. The revival of shamanism has been proceeding with one very serious omission. If you go and you look at the traditional shamanic societies anywhere you want, whether it be in Siberia, in the depths of the Peruvian jungles, whether it be in Hawaii among the kahunas, whether it be in the warrior class of the Nordic and Teutonic peoples, any shamanic culture you look at, you will see that the figure of the shaman is recognized as someone who can heal and kill.
Yeah.
And they've left out the killing part. The revival of shamanism does not consider that aspect, that responsibility, which a shaman has. Every true shaman has not only the capacity to heal, but also the ability to kill. And the same tools can be used. For instance, there's a very powerful plant called tohei in Peru. It's called datura, Jimson weed, devil's weed. Carlos Castaneda used it. It's one of the top 5 psychotropic plants. It's very dangerous. Grows around here all over the place. Well, you can heal with datura. You can go into a deep trance if you don't put yourself in a coma and investigate other worlds. You can do all kinds of supernatural adventures, and you can also kill people with it. So the mission of shamanism is given in the nature of the plants, of the sacred plants that shamans use. And any of these sacred plants, you name them, can equally be used to heal or to harm. So that's a really important point that I'd like to register and get across to people who are listening to our conversation here tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, and it's an important point. I think we've, well, I've said that for a while now, that we're lacking this, this warrior class. We're lacking someone, a lot of people who are ready to take that stand and actually to do something. And the revival of some of these traditions have come in and kind of debilitated, emasculated version of it, and it's not, as you say, it's not complete, because sometimes in order to heal, you will need to be in a position where you can, cut out the rot, right? You need to be able to take care of business to make sure things heal. I'm completely on that page with you.
Yeah, you need to be able to lance the wound and get the pus out,
Yeah.
And there is such a thing on this planet as human pus and human vermin. A maggot is a more noble creature than some of the people that are running banks in countries on the planet Earth. A maggot.
But they've managed to get us to think and believe that this is not the case. Everyone has good in them. It's our job to, retrain these people, put them in the right environment, blah, blah, blah. All these things we're hearing over and over again. How long is that going to continue,
Well, the perpetrators and the psychopaths hope it goes on forever.
Exactly.
Because it absolutely favors their program.
It protects them, yeah.
It absolutely protects them. I pointed out in Not in His Image that the gospel of Jesus, so-called, the gospel attributed to Jesus, was probably written by the enemies of humanity.
Right, yeah.
Because Jesus taught, resist not evil and love your enemy.
Yeah.
Well, who would write that rule if it wasn't the enemy?
I agree.
I dare anybody. You can write me at jll@metahistory.org. I dare anybody on the planet to give me an example from history or from their own personal life in which resisting not evil and loving the enemy led to a good outcome.
Yeah. Tell that to the Teutons, or to the Rugi, or to any of these people that were annihilated by the Roman Empire.
That's right. That's right. It's so manifestly false on the face of it. It's such a con. Now, we're not going to talk now, this evening, about how they've conned us, because there is a huge con game going on. Back in the 60s, we used to call it mind fuck. I love that word. People don't use it so much
It's a
anymore.
good word.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
it says a lot. It's not a fuck that you want to have, however. It's not a fuck that you crave. It's a fuck that you don't want to have.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So mind control is obviously a huge part of social evil. And so part of the attack upon humanity, let's talk for a minute about the attack upon humanity, because that would be a good way to lead into the actual structure and strategies of the party. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, we did, and just to clarify, obviously we talked about some of this last time too, but it needs to, I think you're right, it needs to be put in proper context so people understand that there's a reason behind this. There's a reason why this will have to be implemented, because otherwise, what are the options? What are the other alternatives here? I don't think there are many, if any.
Well, that's for people to decide once they hear what the party is and what its premises are. I'll read from the manifesto here in a minute. But just let me say, going into it, that the mind control and control of the narrative, well, that's a subject that you've discussed over and over again with many of your interviews, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
Control of the narrative. Yeah. Mind control and control of the narrative are forms of psychological warfare. So, the human race, the human species, is not only under attack, actual attack, by heavy weapons and by shortwave, microwave weaponry and chemistry in the food and in the air. I mean, how many ways are they attacking us? Make an inventory. How many ways is the human species being attacked so that it can't simply get along with living and thriving and being creative and getting to know each other and getting along? How many ways?
Yeah.
So there are the brutal ways, using weapons, as is now being done in Syria, now being done in Ukraine, the United States, the USSA, the United Soviet States of America.
Yeah.
Right. Being mostly the imperial military force, right?
Yeah.
That is inflicting gruesome, murderous mayhem upon the planet, right? But in addition to that, there's a storyline. And so you're also being attacked simultaneously in your mind. You're being attacked by the lying narrative. And it's my view that the enemies of life really have the upper hand. And they've had it for a while, since about 1850, as far as I can tell. That's when the Jews were emancipated in Europe, by the way. Yeah. So the narrative is killing us, and everything else they're doing to the food, to the air, is killing us. We've all heard this 1,000 times. And the plain and simple, gruesome point I'm making is that it can't be stopped unless they are stopped, unless the executives and the executors and managers of social evil are stopped. It won't be stopped. Period. So I don't care what plan people have. People may have very, very good plans to change society and make it better, to change the banking system. Well, that's great, but you're not going to be allowed to change the banking system. So I don't care how good your plan is. It won't work. So as I said let me see if I can find it here, in the manifesto of the party, I said that, uh, can there be a single solution to the diverse and overwhelming problems in the world today? Well, obviously, there are countless particular solutions specific to each situation, but there is also one overarching solution that ensures the success of all the others, and that is the definition and deployment of a warrior class. So this is in the manifesto of the party.
Yeah.
And in the next paragraph, it explains very simply, well, why is that? Why is that so? It's so because success in creating a better world depends on eliminating those who will not allow true and positive change to happen. They prevent it from taking its natural course. So if you and I want to do something, if we say, let's just take a silly example, if we go with a group of friends out to the park and we decide that we're going to play Frisbee like the hippies did, in Sunset Park in San Francisco back in the good old days, and we're going to play Frisbee with our dogs in the park, oh, isn't that wonderful? But if there's a few people out there in the park who don't want us to play and who interfere physically or put up barriers or do the kinds of things they do to interfere with the free will of others, then we're not going to be able to have our party. We're not going to be able to change. So when I say there must be one overarching solution, that's what the warrior class is.
Mm.
And anyone can join it in any situation, in any country. It's absolutely a planetary movement.
So it's a way, it's an understanding here that people have to come to, that this is something that could go on and on and on forever, well, until we are at such a state that life as we know it is actually terminated and ended. But the bottom line here is that we're taking an indefinite amount of crap, and nothing is really changing on an effective level to be able to break ourselves free from the class of people you've been talking about.
Yes, lacking a decisive, planned, strategic, integral counterattack, we don't have a chance.
Yeah.
At least that's my humble
I
opinion.
agree. I've come to that conclusion as well, that something has to be done about it, because it's just it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And there has to be that kind of response to it. And I think people have to look at it historically as well, that's part of human nature. It's been part of our past of not only reacting to these things, but responding to them, of being in a position where we actually try to counteract what's happening to us. And I've been so frustrated with the fact that we've been so debilitated. We've been so domesticated also on top of things, that we're almost at a point where we're incapable of dealing with some of these things, which is tremendously, dangerous for all of mankind.
It's very dangerous, Henry. Very dangerous. Domestication and pacification of the human animal has been going on under patriarchy for centuries. And religion has been largely a tool of this pacification, particularly the Christian religion.
Yeah.
Not Judaic religion so much, and certainly not Islam, which is another subject. But the religion of Christianity has taught, well, I just said, who would write the formula? Love your enemy and resist not evil. I say your enemy wrote that formula and made you adopt it out of shame and guilt. And, the warrior spirit has been, as far as I can tell, beaten out of the soul of most people walking around on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there is one chance to rally. It's what Don Juan called the sorcerer's rally. When the sorcerer rallies at the final moment of an experiment of a venture into the Nahual or of a confrontation with an enemy, be it natural or supernatural, the sorcerer has to rally. Does it mean to rally? It means two things, which again were specifically prefigured in Castaneda's work. The first thing is that you bring the totality of yourself to the challenge.
And why is that important?
Because you can't do it half-heartedly, or you can't do it just on, among other things. It has to be the total focus of your existence. You bring the totality of yourself to it.
It has to be for real, right? Otherwise, it's something that we look at from a distance. I mean, again, that's why it's important with recognizing the reality of the threat, because otherwise, if we don't take this seriously, how are we going to be able to fight seriously?
That's right. And the second thing, the second element is that you know that what's worth living for is worth dying for. And you're going to die anyway.
There's a Norse proverb that says, if you don't live for something, you'll die for nothing.
That's right. That's right. So you have to have something to die for, and you have to bring the totality of yourself to this challenge today. And this challenge, defined in the manifesto of the party, is to take down the psychopaths and the enemies of life, and to use varied means, including magic. So there is instruction within the Kalika War Party of how to use magic in various ways, and one of those ways is to use magic to kill. This is called the Kalika Lethal Strike. Now, I'm sure there's some people who would say, well, killing isn't going to get you anywhere. Well, have you tried it? You know, has anybody tried it yet?
Right.
Depends on who you kill, you know. I mean, this line has been said by Clint Eastwood many times before. You know, hey, it looks like there's going to be some killing taking place in this town. Yeah, well, it depends on who you kill, you know, because they're killing you. They're killing you. You're not just killing you, they're killing generations of people.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, what did Madeleine Albright, you remember that famous one? Madeleine Albright. Well, was she Secretary of State? Famous interview. You can see it on the internet. Some woman says to her, well, you know, we've done a lot of damage in Iraq here, you know, since the fall of Saddam Hussein, and something like, you know, there's 500,000 children have died. Do you think it was worth it? Oh, yeah. Well, worth it to who, Madeleine?
Yeah.
Worth it to whom, to use the correct grammar? You see, so they don't think anything of killing 500,000. I'll put it this way. If Madeleine Albright doesn't think anything of killing 500,000 children, then why should I think anything of killing Madeleine Albright?
Yeah. You're right.
Let's wake up and face it, because that is the test of this divine experiment. It is the test of conscience.
And it's not an unfounded attack at this point. It's based in self-defense.
You can call it self-defense. Yeah, it's in defense, but it's not just in defense of your personal self. Now, you know, if I go out, for instance, you know, to a bar one night, this happened to me once actually, and some drunk, crazy person like attacks me physically, you know, out in the street, then I have to defend myself, right? Mm-hmm. That's self-defense. Yeah. But we're talking about defending, you know, people you don't even know, defending people who can't fight for themselves, defending the earth, defending the birds, the bees, the snakes, the whales, defending all life against the enemies of life. That is the fucking bottom line.
Yeah.
And the time has come to do something. And the time has come to strike back. And the Kalika War Party is a strike force organized in a very particular and precise manner to deliver the maximum counterattack against those who are ruining life on this planet.
Yep.
And it's not just taking out or eliminating specific agents of the agenda of social evil. That's just part of it. It's taking